The blood-curdling screams echoed across the dusty plains of Eureka, Nevada, as Victoria Ellery watched her family's homestead burn to ashes in the scorching summer of 1876. Standing barefoot in the dirt, her father's blood still warm on her hands, she felt the last remnants of hope drain from her body like water through sand. The raid had been swift and merciless. 3 men wearing bandanas over their faces had appeared at dusk, demanding payment for protection her father had never agreed to. When he refused, they showed no hesitation. Her mother had been gone 2 years now to consumption, and her younger brother Timothy had been in Carson City collecting supplies. In the span of 15 minutes, Victoria had become completely alone in the world. "There ain't nothing left for you here now, girl," one of the men had taunted before they rode away. "Better start walking or the coyotes will have you by morning." Victoria had remained frozen, watching the flames consume everything she'd ever known. 22 years of life, and suddenly she had nothing but the plain calico dress on her back and her mother's silver locket around her neck. As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, Victoria found herself stumbling toward town, her eyes dry and burning. She hadn't shed a tear, couldn't, somehow. The numbness had settled into her bones like an old friend, and she welcomed it. Better to feel nothing than the crushing weight of all she'd lost. Eureka had grown considerably since silver was discovered in the nearby mountains in '64. What had once been little more than a watering hole for prospectors passing through had blossomed into a proper mining town with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a hotel, 3 saloons, and various merchants. It wasn't Virginia City by any means, but it had enough bustle to offer a woman on her own few options for survival, none of them particularly appealing. Victoria's appearance in town caused little stir. A woman with singed clothing and wild eyes wasn't an uncommon sight in mining country where tragedy struck often and mercilessly. She walked unsteadily down the main street, unsure of her destination until she found herself outside the Silverado Hotel. "Lord have mercy," the hotel proprietress, Mrs. Adeline Walsh, exclaimed when Victoria pushed through the door. "What's happened to you, child?" Victoria opened her mouth but found she had no words to describe the horror she'd witnessed. Her knees buckled beneath her, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the concerned face of the older woman rushing toward her. When Victoria awoke, she was lying on a narrow bed in what appeared to be a storage room. Clean sheets had been tucked around her, and her filthy dress had been replaced with a cotton nightgown. For one beautiful, fleeting moment, she wondered if perhaps it had all been a terrible dream. "You're awake." Mrs. Walsh entered carrying a tray with a steaming cup of tea. "I was beginning to worry. How long?" Victoria's voice was a dry rasp. "Nearly a full day." The woman set the tray on a small table and helped Victoria sit up. "Sheriff Rhodes is anxious to speak with you, says there was a fire out at the Ellery place." Victoria accepted the tea with trembling hands. "They killed my father." Mrs. Walsh's weathered face softened with sympathy. "I feared as much. Rest now. The sheriff can wait another hour." Over the next several days, Victoria recounted her story to the sheriff, but with little hope for justice. The men had worn masks, and she couldn't identify them beyond vague descriptions that could match half the drifters in the territory. The sheriff made promises about investigations, but Victoria recognized empty words when she heard them. Mrs. Walsh offered her temporary lodging and work at the hotel, cleaning rooms and helping in the kitchen. Victoria accepted, having nowhere else to go. Her brother Timothy never returned from Carson City, and after weeks of inquiry, she learned he'd been killed in a bar fight the very night her father was murdered. Fate had seen fit to orphan her completely in a single evening. The work was grueling, the hours long, but Victoria welcomed the exhaustion. When her body ached and her hands were raw from scrubbing, she could sometimes forget, if only for moments, the weight of her grief. She moved through each day like a ghost, speaking only when necessary, avoiding the pitying glances of the townsfolk. At night, she would stare at the ceiling of her small room, too hollow even to cry. What was the point of tears when they changed nothing? What was the point of living when everything she'd loved had been ripped away? 3 months after the tragedy, Victoria had saved enough to purchase a small plot in the cemetery and have proper markers made for her family, though their bodies weren't there. Her father's remains had been buried hastily near the homestead, and Timothy's body lay in an unmarked grave somewhere in Carson City. "You can't go on like this," Mrs. Walsh told her one evening as they sat in the kitchen after closing. "You're wasting away before my eyes." Victoria looked down at her hands, red and chapped from harsh lye soap. "I'm surviving. There's a difference between surviving and living, child." The older woman reached across the table and clasped Victoria's hands. "Your heart's still beating, but you've stopped letting it feel anything." "Feeling hurts too much," Victoria whispered. "Then maybe it's time for a change. My sister in Sacramento has written asking if I know anyone trustworthy who might come help with her boarding house. The city might be good for you, a fresh start, away from these memories." Victoria considered the offer. There was nothing keeping her in Eureka except ghosts and nightmares. Perhaps distance would dull the pain that had become her constant companion. "I'll think on it," she promised. But before Victoria could make a decision, fate intervened once again in the form of a cattle drive passing through Eureka on its way to California markets. The town suddenly filled with cowboys, trail-weary and eager for whiskey, women, and whatever other pleasures a mining town might offer after months on the dusty trail. The Silverado Hotel was filled to capacity, and Victoria found herself working from dawn until well past midnight, changing sheets, hauling water, and avoiding wandering hands. Most of the cowhands were respectful enough once Mrs. Walsh made it clear that her girls were not for sale, but there were always a few who'd had too much to drink and thought a serving girl was fair game. It was on the second night of the cattle drive stay that Victoria encountered Quentin Lawson. She'd been sent to deliver fresh towels to room 4, having been assured by Mrs. Walsh that the occupant was out for the evening. She knocked softly, and when no answer came, used her key to enter. The room was dark save for a single oil lamp turned low on the bedside table. Victoria moved quietly, not wishing to disturb the guests in neighboring rooms. She was replacing the towels when a voice from the shadows nearly caused her heart to stop. "I didn't request any towels." Victoria spun around to find a man sitting in the corner chair, his boots propped on the windowsill as he gazed out at the night sky. In the dim light, she could make out broad shoulders and a profile that seemed carved from stone. "Forgive me, sir," she managed, clutching the old towels to her chest. "Mrs. Walsh thought you'd gone out for the evening. Changed my mind." He swung his legs down and stood, and Victoria took an instinctive step backward. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the lean, muscled build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. As he stepped into the pool of lamplight, she saw he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Victoria said, edging toward the door. "You didn't." His voice was low, with the faintest hint of a southern drawl. "Truth be told, it's nice to see a face that ain't covered in trail dust and whiskers." Despite herself, Victoria felt a ghost of a smile touch her lips. I'm sure the saloon girls would be happy to offer you the same respite, one corner of his mouth lifted. Not interested in paying for companionship, madam. Never have been. Victoria nodded, unsure how to respond. She'd become unaccustomed to casual conversation these past months. Will you be needing anything else, Mr. Lawson? Quentin Lawson. And no, I'm all set. Though I wouldn't mind knowing your name. She hesitated, surprised by the request. Most hotel guests barely noticed her existence beyond her ability to fulfill their needs. Victoria Ellery. Victoria. He said her name slowly, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. It suits you. Thank you. She shifted uncomfortably under his steady gaze. His eyes were an unusual shade that she couldn't quite discern in the dim light, not quite blue, not quite green. Good night, Mr. Lawson. Night, Miss Ellery. Victoria slipped from the room, her heart inexplicably racing. She told herself it was merely surprise at finding the room occupied when she'd expected it empty. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she'd thought long dead, something flickered to life, a tiny spark she quickly smothered. Over the next few days, Victoria found herself frequently crossing paths with Quentin Lawson. Unlike his fellow cowhands, he didn't spend his evenings carousing in the saloons. Instead, he could often be found on the hotel's front porch, whittling or reading by lamplight. He would tip his hat when she passed, sometimes offering a polite "Evening, Miss Ellery," but never pressing for conversation. There was something different about him that Victoria couldn't quite place. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that required no bluster or bravado. The other men on the drive clearly respected him, deferring to him when decisions needed to be made, though she gathered he wasn't the trail boss. On the fourth night of the cattle drive stay, Victoria was returning to the hotel after delivering clean linens to the doctor's office when she heard raised voices from the alley beside the Frontier Saloon. Instinctively, she quickened her pace, keeping her eyes forward as she'd learned to do in a town where a woman alone was always vulnerable. Well, looky here, boys. It's that uppity hotel girl. Victoria's blood ran cold as three men emerged from the shadows to block her path. She recognized the leader immediately, Jed Harmon, one of the cowhands who'd been particularly persistent in his unwanted attentions. "Excuse me," she said firmly, attempting to step around them. "I need to get back to work." Harmon moved to block her, alcohol heavy on his breath. "What's your hurry, darlin'? Night's still young. Mrs. Walsh is expecting me." Victoria fought to keep her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "That old biddy can wait." Harmon reached for her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "We've been watching you, girl. Acting all high and mighty like you're too good for working men." Victoria tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me." "Or what?" Harmon laughed, the sound echoing off the narrow alley walls. "Ain't nobody around to. I believe the lady asked you to let her go." The quiet voice cut through the night like a knife. All four of them turned to see Quentin Lawson standing at the mouth of the alley, his posture relaxed, but his eyes hard as flint. Harmon sneered. "This ain't your concern, Lawson. Just having a friendly chat with the lady here." "Doesn't look friendly from where I'm standing." Quentin stepped forward, his spurs making a soft jingle against the packed earth. "And I'm making it my concern." Victoria felt Harmon's grip loosen slightly as uncertainty crept into his expression. The other two men shifted uneasily, clearly not eager to tangle with Lawson. "You taking her side over your own crew?" Harmon demanded, an ugly flush creeping up his neck. "I'm taking the side of decency." Quentin's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. "Now, you boys have had too much to drink. Best head back to camp and sleep it off before you do something you'll regret come morning." For a moment, Victoria thought Harmon might refuse. His fingers flexed on her arm, and she could feel the anger radiating from him in waves. Then, abruptly, he shoved her away. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway," he muttered. "Probably cold as ice under them skirts." Victoria stumbled but managed to keep her footing as Harmon and his companions shouldered past Quentin, making sure to give him a wide berth despite their bravado. Quentin watched them go, his expression unreadable in the darkness. When they were out of sight, he turned to Victoria. "Are you hurt?" She rubbed her arm where Harmon's fingers had left marks. "No, thank you for intervening." "No thanks necessary." He moved closer, and in the spill of moonlight, she could see genuine concern in his eyes. "Would you allow me to walk you back to the hotel, just to be sure they don't double back?" Victoria hesitated. She'd grown wary of men and their offers of assistance, which too often came with unspoken expectations. But there was something in Quentin's manner that suggested no ulterior motive, just a simple offer of protection. "That would be appreciated, Mr. Lawson." They walked in silence for several moments, the sounds of revelry from the saloons fading behind them. Victoria was acutely aware of his presence beside her, tall and solid, his stride deliberately shortened to match her own. "I'm sorry about Harmon," Quentin finally said. "He's got a mean streak when he drinks, but that's no excuse." "You needn't apologize for him," Victoria replied. "You're not responsible for his behavior." "No, but I feel responsible for bringing trouble to your doorstep." "Our outfit's not usually the rowdy type, but Trail's End makes some men forget their manners." Victoria glanced up at him. "You're the trail boss." A small smile touched his lips. "No, madam, just the foreman. Boss is back at the ranch, counting the days until we deliver his beeves to market." "You're from Texas," she guessed, noting again that subtle drawl, "born and raised near San Antonio. Been working for the Double Bar since I was 17. They reached the hotel steps and Quentin paused, removing his hat. "Here you are, safe and sound." Victoria turned to face him, suddenly reluctant for their brief interaction to end. It had been so long since she'd had a conversation that wasn't about work or colored by pity for her circumstances. "Thank you again, Mr. Lawson. Not many would have stepped in like you did." He shook his head, moonlight catching in his dark hair. "Any decent man would have done the same." "Perhaps," Victoria said softly, "but decent men seem in short supply these days." Something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of the pain behind her words. "The world can be a cruel place, Miss Ellery, especially to those who face it alone, but not everyone aims to cause harm." Victoria felt tears threatening for the first time in months. She blinked them back quickly, unwilling to show such vulnerability. "Good night, Mr. Lawson. I hope the remainder of your stay in Eureka is uneventful." "Good night, Miss Ellery." He settled his hat back on his head and offered a small nod before turning to leave. Victoria watched him walk away, his straight-backed silhouette gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did she realize she was still standing on the porch, her heart beating in a rhythm she'd almost forgotten was possible. The following morning, Victoria went about her duties in a fog, her thoughts continually drifting to her encounter with Quentin Lawson. It troubled her that a simple act of kindness from a stranger could affect her so deeply. Had she truly become so hardened that common decency now seemed remarkable? "You're a million miles away today," Mrs. Walsh observed as they worked together preparing breakfast for the guests. "Anything you care to share?" Victoria focused on kneading the biscuit dough with more vigor than necessary. "Just tired, I suppose. MMM." The older woman's tone suggested she didn't believe a word of it. "Wouldn't have anything to do with that tall drink of water in room 4, would it?" Victoria's cheeks flamed. "Of course not. Shame." He seems a sight better than most who pass through. Polite, clean, pays his bill on time. Mrs. Walsh cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. And easy on the eyes, if you don't mind my saying, Mrs. Walsh. Victoria couldn't help but laugh at the woman's blunt assessment. It felt strange, the laughter rusty and unfamiliar after so many months of grief. The older woman's eyes softened. There it is. Been wondering if I'd ever hear that sound again. Victoria sobered quickly. He's leaving today. The whole outfit is moving on. Is that so? Mrs. Walsh pursed her lips thoughtfully. Well then, best get these biscuits in the oven. Can't send cowboys off on empty stomachs. The dining room was bustling when Victoria emerged with a tray of fresh biscuits. Most of the double bar crew was there, eating heartily before another long day on the trail. She moved efficiently between tables, refilling coffee cups and avoiding eye contact with Jed Harmon, who sat sullenly in the corner. She was aware of Quentin the moment he entered the room. He'd shaved, she noted, and his dark hair was damp as if freshly washed. He nodded politely to several of his men before taking a seat at an empty table by the window. Victoria hesitated, then approached with the coffee pot. "Coffee, Mr. Lawson." He looked up, and those unusual eyes she could see now, they were a striking shade of gray-green crinkled slightly at the corners. "Please, Miss Ellery." She filled his cup, conscious of how his gaze never left her face. "Will you be leaving today as planned?" That was the intention. He took a sip of his coffee. "Though there's been a change of plans, at least for me." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Oh, trail boss wants me to stay behind a few days, see about purchasing some additional stock from a ranch outside town. The rest of the boys will move on with the herd." Victoria told herself the flutter in her stomach was merely surprise, nothing more. "I see. Will you be keeping your room then, if it's available?" "I'll let Mrs. Walsh know." She was about to move on to the next table when his voice stopped her. "Miss Ellery." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I was wondering if you might be willing to show me around town a bit this afternoon. Being as I'll be here a few days, thought I might get to know the place better." Victoria stared at him, taken aback by the request. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had sought out her company. "I work until 5. I can wait." His expression remained carefully neutral, giving her every opportunity to refuse without awkwardness. Before she could think better of it, Victoria found herself nodding. "Very well. Though I should warn you, Eureka isn't exactly brimming with attractions." A smile broke across his face, transforming his serious features into something that made her heart skip a beat. "I'll be the judge of that." Throughout the day, Victoria told herself repeatedly that she was being foolish. She barely knew this man. He would be gone in a few days, continuing on to California with his outfit. And even if he weren't leaving, she had no business entertaining thoughts of what, exactly? Friendship. Something more. She'd made her peace with solitude these past months. Or if not peace, at least an uneasy truce. Opening herself to connection meant risking pain, and she'd had enough pain to last several lifetimes. Yet when 5 o'clock arrived, Victoria found herself changing out of her work dress into her one good outfit, a modest blue calico that had once belonged to her mother. She pinned her thick chestnut hair into a neat bun, and even dabbed a bit of rosewater behind her ears, a luxury she hadn't indulged in since before the tragedy. Quentin was waiting on the hotel porch, hat in hand. He'd changed as well, she noted, into a clean white shirt and dark vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He stood when he saw her, and something in his expression made her feel suddenly self-conscious. "You look lovely, Miss Ellery." "Thank you." She smoothed her hands over her skirt. "Though I'm afraid I may have misled you. As I said, there's not much to see in Eureka." "That's all right." He offered his arm, I'm more interested in the company than the sights." They walked slowly down the main street as the day's heat began to fade into a pleasant evening coolness. Victoria pointed out the various establishments: the assay office, the Chinese laundry, the newspaper office that printed the Eureka Sentinel twice weekly. "How long have you lived here?" Quentin asked as they paused to watch a stagecoach arrive at the Wells Fargo office. "All my life. My parents came west during the Silver Rush in '64. Victoria swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. "We had a homestead about 5 miles outside town." Quentin caught her use of the past tense. "Had?" Victoria fixed her gaze on a distant mountain peak. "There was a fire 3 months ago. I'm sorry." His voice was soft, and she could hear in those 2 simple words that he understood there was more to the story than she was telling. "Thank you." She forced brightness into her voice. "What about you, Mr. Lawson? Have you always been a cowboy?" He allowed her to change the subject, for which she was grateful. "More or less. My father ran cattle on a small spread outside San Antonio. Wasn't much, but it was enough to teach me the trade. When he passed on, the bank took the land for debts. I hired on with the double bar and worked my way up from wrangler to foreman. You must enjoy it to have stayed so long." "I do." His expression turned thoughtful. "There's a freedom to it that's hard to explain. Just you and the sky and the land stretching out forever. Makes a man feel small and significant all at once." "Significant?" Victoria questioned. "Being responsible for living things: cattle, horses, the men under your charge. One wrong decision can mean life or death out on the trail." He glanced down at her. "But I reckon you understand that, having lived on a homestead." "Yes." Victoria felt a pang of loss for the simple rhythms of her former life: gathering eggs at dawn, tending the vegetable garden, helping her father with the small herd of dairy cows they kept. Every day brought its own challenges, but there was satisfaction in meeting them. They had reached the end of the main street and now stood looking out over the valley where Eureka nestled against the foothills. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, the distant mountains purple in the fading light. "It's beautiful country," Quentin remarked. "Yes." Victoria hesitated, then added softly, "even when it breaks your heart." Quentin turned to study her profile. "Would you tell me what happened, Miss Ellery? To your homestead? To your family?" Victoria stiffened. She hadn't spoken of that night to anyone except the sheriff, and even then she'd recounted only the barest facts. The full horror of it remained locked inside her, a festering wound she dared not expose to light. "I understand if you'd rather not," Quentin added when she remained silent. "Some hurts are too deep for sharing." His understanding, rather than making her retreat further, somehow loosened the words that had been trapped inside her for months. "They came at dusk. 3 men masked, said they were collecting for protection. My father refused to pay, said he'd never agreed to any such arrangement." Victoria's voice grew distant as the memories flooded back. "They shot him, right there on our front porch. Then they set fire to the barn, the house, everything. They said there was nothing left for me now, that I should start walking or the coyotes would have me by morning." Quentin's expression darkened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "And your mother? Lost to consumption 2 years prior. My brother Timothy was in Carson City that night." Victoria's laugh held no humor. "Fate has a cruel sense of timing. He was killed in a bar fight the very same evening. I didn't learn of it until weeks later." "Victoria." Quentin's use of her given name startled her. "I can't begin to imagine what you've endured, but the fact that you're still standing, still going on day after day, that takes a kind of courage most people will never know." "Not courage," Victoria corrected. "Necessity. What choice did I have? There's always a choice." He looked away back toward the mountains. I've seen strong men give up for less, decide the pain isn't worth bearing and take the easy way out. Victoria thought of the dark moments in the past months when she'd contemplated exactly that, how simple it would be to slip away, to join her family in whatever lay beyond this life. What had stopped her hadn't been courage, but something more like inertia, a stubborn refusal to let those men take everything from her, even her life itself. Perhaps, she conceded, but surviving isn't the same as living. I go through each day like a ghost, not fully here, not fully gone. Sometimes I wonder if I died that night too and just haven't had the sense to lie down. Quentin turned back to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You're not dead, Victoria Ellery. Wounded, yes. Grieving, yes. But very much alive. Before she could respond, a church bell began to toll, marking the hour. Victoria started, realizing how long they'd been talking. I should get back. Mrs. Walsh will be wondering where I've gone. Quentin nodded, offering his arm once more. Of course. They walked back to the hotel in companionable silence, the air between them somehow changed by the confidences they'd shared. At the bottom of the porch steps, Victoria paused. Thank you for listening, Mr. Lawson. I haven't spoken of that night to anyone, not really. Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter, he said quietly. And I'm honored you trusted me with yours. Victoria searched his face in the gathering dusk, looking for signs of the pity she'd come to dread, the sad smiles and averted eyes of those who didn't know what to say to a woman who'd lost everything. But all she saw in his steady gaze was understanding, and something else she couldn't quite name. Good night, Mr. Lawson, Quentin, he corrected gently. After what you've shared with me, I think we can dispense with formalities. Despite herself, Victoria smiled. Good night, Quentin. Good night, Victoria. He tipped his hat. Would it be presumptuous to ask if I might call on you tomorrow? The question caught her off guard. She'd assumed their evening together was a one-time occurrence, a brief diversion for a bored cowboy stuck in town longer than planned. I suppose not, she managed. Though I work until 5 again. I'll be here at 5:01. The smile he gave her then was warm enough to chase away the evening chill. Sleep well, Victoria. She watched him climb the stairs and disappear into the hotel before making her way to the side entrance that led to her small room off the kitchen. As she prepared for bed, Victoria realized with a start that, for the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow. True to his word, Quentin was waiting on the porch the following evening at precisely 5:01. This time, he had a small package tucked under his arm and a slightly nervous air about him. I hope you don't mind, he said after greeting her, but I took the liberty of getting us some provisions. Thought we might ride out a ways, watch the sunset from the foothills. Victoria hesitated. The idea of leaving town with a man she barely knew, no matter how trustworthy he seemed, gave her pause. And yet, something in her longed for escape, if only for a few hours, from the confines of Eureka and the memories that haunted her there. Seeing her uncertainty, Quentin quickly added, We needn't go far. Just to Prospect Ridge where we can see the whole valley. We'd be back well before dark. I don't have a horse, Victoria said, though it wasn't the real reason for her hesitation. I've borrowed 2 from the livery. He studied her face. But if you'd rather stay in town, I understand completely. Victoria made her decision suddenly. No, I'd like to go. Let me just tell Mrs. Walsh so she doesn't worry. Minutes later, they were riding side by side out of town, following a well-worn trail that wound its way up into the foothills. Victoria hadn't been on horseback since before the tragedy, and she'd forgotten how freeing it felt, the rhythmic movement, the wind in her face, the world opening up around her. Quentin rode slightly ahead, occasionally pointing out interesting landmarks or wildlife. He was an easy companion, not forcing conversation but not allowing silence to become awkward either. By the time they reached Prospect Ridge, Victoria felt more relaxed than she had in months. The view from the ridge was breathtaking. The entire Eureka Valley stretched below them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. To the west, the Diamond Range caught the sinking sun, their peaks glowing like burnished copper. "This is magnificent," Victoria breathed as Quentin spread a blanket on a flat outcropping of rock. "Thought you might appreciate it." He began unpacking his provisions: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of wine. "Hope you're hungry. Riding always gives me an appetite." They ate in comfortable silence, watching as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Victoria found herself sneaking glances at her companion, trying to reconcile this gentle, thoughtful man with the hardened cowboy who had faced down 3 drunken men without flinching. "May I ask you something?" she said finally. Quentin looked up from slicing an apple. "Of course." "Why did you invite me here? Why are you being so kind to me?" He considered the question seriously before answering. "At first, I suppose it was because you seemed so alone. There was a sadness about you that pulled at me, even before I knew your story." He set down his knife. "But now, it's because I enjoy your company. You're strong, Victoria, stronger than you know. And despite everything you've been through, there's still a light in you that hasn't been extinguished." Victoria looked away, uncomfortable with his assessment. "You see what you want to see." "No," he said firmly. "I see what's there. You may have given up on yourself, but that doesn't mean everyone else has to." His words stirred something in her: anger, perhaps, or defensiveness. "You don't know me, Quentin Lawson. A few conversations doesn't give you the right to judge how I'm living my life." "I'm not judging." His voice remained calm. "Just observing. There's a difference." "Well, observe this," Victoria snapped, suddenly desperate to push him away before she revealed any more of her broken self. "I'm not some damsel in distress waiting for a knight on horseback to rescue her. I don't need your pity or your charity or whatever this is supposed to be." Quentin's expression didn't change. "I never thought you were. And this isn't pity or charity, Victoria. This is one person recognizing another's pain because they've felt it themselves." That stopped her cold. "What do you mean?" Quentin looked out over the valley, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. 6 years ago, my wife and infant son died of fever. I was away on a cattle drive. By the time I got home, they were already in the ground." Victoria's anger drained away, replaced by a rush of empathy. "Quentin, I'm so sorry," he nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "For 2 years after, I was just a shell. Did my job, ate when someone put food in front of me, slept when I couldn't stay awake any longer. But I wasn't living, just like you said about yourself. I was a ghost, haunting my own life." "What changed?" Victoria asked softly. "Time, partly. The wound never heals completely, but it scabs over. Starts to hurt less when you move." He turned to look at her directly. "But mostly, it was realizing that by refusing to live, I was dishonoring their memory. Emily, my wife, she loved life so fiercely. She would have been furious with me for wasting even a day of it in numbness." Victoria felt tears pricking at her eyes. "And now I try to live each day fully. I still miss them, still talk to them sometimes when I'm alone on the trail." His smile was sad but genuine. "But I've found joy again, too. In simple things: a sunrise, a job well done, good company." He reached across the blanket and took her hand, his touch warm and solid. "I'm not trying to fix you, Victoria. God knows I'm not qualified for that. But when I saw you standing so straight-backed in that hotel, carrying your grief like armor, I recognized myself. And I thought perhaps you might need a friend who understands that sometimes breathing is an act of courage." Victoria looked down at their joined hands. His was large and calloused, hers pale and work roughened. Different lives, different paths, but the same heart-deep pain binding them together in this moment. "I don't know how to start living again," she admitted in a whisper. "Sometimes I'm afraid that if I let myself feel anything, it will be too much. That I'll shatter into pieces too small to ever put back together." "You don't have to do it all at once," Quentin said gently. "Just one moment at a time, like right now sitting here watching the sunset. Just be in this moment, nothing more." Victoria lifted her gaze to the horizon, where the sun was melting into the distant mountains in a blaze of crimson and gold. She took a deep breath, then another, focusing on the beauty before her, the warm breeze on her face, the solid presence of the man beside her. For just that moment, she allowed herself to exist without the weight of grief pressing down on her. And in that brief respite, she felt something unfurl within her, not happiness, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin, possibility. They rode back to town as twilight deepened into night, a companionable silence between them. When they reached the hotel, Quentin helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for coming with me today," he said, his voice low in the darkness. "Thank you for inviting me." Victoria found herself reluctant to part from him, "and for sharing your story." "Will I see you tomorrow?" The question held no presumption, only hope. Victoria nodded. "I'd like that." His smile was visible even in the dim light of the hotel's porch lantern. "Good night then, Victoria. Sleep well." "Good night, Quentin." As she watched him lead the horses away toward the livery, Victoria realized she was smiling, a small, tentative thing, but a smile nonetheless. And for the first time in months, when she laid her head on her pillow that night, her dreams were not of fire and death, but of sunsets and possibility. The following morning brought unexpected changes to Victoria's routine. Mrs. Walsh, ever observant, had noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor and seemed determined to encourage it. "I've been thinking," the older woman announced as they prepared breakfast, "that you've been working far too hard these past months. Starting today, I'm giving you afternoons off." Victoria looked up in surprise. "But there's so much to do, nothing that can't wait or be handled by someone else." Mrs. Walsh's tone brooked no argument. "You're young, Victoria. You should have some time to yourself." Victoria suspected this sudden concern for her welfare had everything to do with a certain tall cowboy and very little to do with her workload, but she found herself grateful nonetheless. When Quentin appeared for breakfast, she was able to tell him she'd be free after the noon meal. "In that case," he said, his eyes crinkling with pleasure, "I have a proposal for you." The proposal turned out to be a picnic by Diamond Creek, a small stream that meandered along the eastern edge of town. It was a popular spot in summer, but on this mild autumn day, they had it mostly to themselves. "I leave the day after tomorrow," Quentin said as they sat on the grassy bank, watching water tumble over smooth stones. "The trail boss sent word he's expecting me to catch up with the herd by week's end." Victoria had known this moment was coming, but the news still sent a pang through her heart. In just a few days, Quentin Lawson had somehow become important to her in ways she hadn't thought possible after all she'd lost. "Will you return to Texas after delivering the cattle?" she asked, plucking a blade of grass and twirling it between her fingers. "That's the plan. Though there's been talk of the boss expanding operations in California. If he does, he might want me to stay on and oversee things there." Quentin watched her closely. "What about you? Will you stay in Eureka?" Victoria considered the question. Until meeting Quentin, she hadn't thought much about her future beyond surviving each day. The idea of leaving Eureka had seemed both terrifying and pointless. What difference did it make where she carried her grief? "I don't know," she answered honestly. Mrs. Walsh mentioned her sister in Sacramento needs help with a boarding house. I was considering it before, she broke off, not wanting to say before I met you, though that was the truth of it. Sacramento's not far from the ranches where we deliver our cattle, Quentin observed, his tone carefully neutral. Might be I could visit next time we drive the herd west. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. Would you want to? He met her gaze directly. Very much. The simple declaration hung between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Victoria felt herself standing at a crossroads, one path leading back to the safe, numb existence she'd been living, the other toward something unknown and potentially painful, but also potentially wonderful. I think, she said slowly, I might like Sacramento. A fresh start could be good for me. Quentin's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I think it could be. They spent the remainder of the afternoon by the creek, talking of everything and nothing, his life on the ranch, her childhood in Eureka, books they'd read, places they hoped to see. With each passing hour, Victoria felt layers of protective numbness peeling away, leaving her raw and vulnerable, but also more alive than she'd been in months. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they reluctantly gathered their things and started back toward town. They had nearly reached the main street when a commotion ahead caught their attention. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, a woman's scream. Stay here, Quentin said, his expression immediately alert. But Victoria was already moving forward, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. The disturbance was centered around the Frontier Saloon, where a crowd had gathered on the boardwalk. As they approached, Victoria saw Sheriff Rhodes trying to maintain order while several men argued vehemently. What's happening? She asked a woman standing at the edge of the crowd. They caught one of the men who have been terrorizing homesteaders, the woman replied, her eyes bright with the excitement of drama. Some cowboy recognized him from a wanted poster. Victoria froze, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Who? She managed. The woman shrugged. Don't know his name. Big fellow with a scar on his chin. They say he's part of the Stover gang. The world tilted beneath Victoria's feet. The Stover gang, three brothers known for targeting isolated homesteads, demanding protection money, and burning out those who refused to pay. She'd given their description to Sheriff Rhodes, but he'd claimed there wasn't enough to go on. Victoria. Quentin's voice seemed to come from very far away. What is it? It could be them, she whispered. The men who killed my father. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without a word, he took her elbow and guided her through the crowd until they reached the sheriff. What's the situation, Sheriff? Quentin asked, positioning himself so that Victoria was partially shielded from the onlookers. Rhodes, a weather-beaten man in his 50s, looked relieved to see a calm face in the midst of chaos. Got Lloyd Stover locked up inside. His brother Jeb is still at large, probably headed for the hills. He glanced at Victoria, recognition flickering in his eyes. Miss Ellery, didn't expect to see you here. Is it true? Victoria's voice was stronger than she expected. Is he one of the men who have been burning homesteads? The sheriff nodded grimly. Looks that way. Found items on him that matched descriptions from several victims, and he was spending money like water for a man with no visible means of support. I want to see him. The words were out before Victoria had fully formed the thought. Now, Miss Ellery, I don't think that's wise. I need to know if he's the one who murdered my father. Quentin placed a supportive hand at the small of her back. Maybe the sheriff could arrange a brief identification, just to be sure. Rhodes looked from Victoria's determined face to Quentin's steady one and sighed. Fine. But just a look, you understand. No talking to the prisoner. and you'll need to wait until we get this crowd dispersed." It took nearly an hour for the sheriff to clear the street and restore order. During that time, Victoria stood silently beside Quentin, drawing strength from his solid presence. Part of her was terrified of what she might see in the jail, would she recognize one of the masked men who had destroyed her world? Another part desperately needed to know, to put a face to the nightmare that had haunted her for months. Finally, Rhodes beckoned them inside. The Eureka jail was a small affair, just 2 cells at the back of the sheriff's office. In the first sat a large man with unkempt dark hair and several days' growth of beard. A jagged scar ran from his chin down his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. He looked up as they entered, his eyes narrowing with disinterest until they fell on Victoria. Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or merely curiosity at the intensity of her gaze. "Well," Rhodes asked quietly. "Is he one of them?" Victoria studied the man carefully. The night of the attack, the men had worn bandanas over their faces, but their eyes and builds had been visible. This man was certainly large enough to be one of them, and there was something in his cold stare that sent a chill of memory down her spine. "I think so," she said finally. "The eyes. And his voice. If I heard him speak, I might be sure." "That wasn't the agreement," Rhodes began, but the prisoner had already risen from his cot and approached the bars. "Well, well," he drawled, his lips curling into a smirk. "If it ain't the little girl from the Ellery place. Surprised to see you alive, missy. Thought for sure the coyotes would have had you by now." The words, those same cruel words from that terrible night, struck Victoria like a physical blow. Her knees threatened to buckle, but Quentin's arm was suddenly around her waist, supporting her. "That's him," she whispered. "He was there. He said those exact words to me after they shot my father." The prisoner laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. "Shoulda finished you too, girl. My brother Jeb wanted to, but I said nah, let her run. More fun that way." Quentin's arm tightened around Victoria, but his voice when he spoke was deadly calm. "Sheriff, I believe you have your confession." Rhodes nodded grimly. "Reckon I do." To the prisoner he added, "Lloyd Stover, you're now being charged with the murder of James Ellery in addition to the other crimes already noted. I suggest you keep your mouth shut until the judge arrives next week." Stover spat on the floor. "Won't matter. My brother's still out there. And he don't take kindly to folks who cross family." "Is that a threat?" Rhodes demanded. "Just a fact." Stover's gaze lingered on Victoria, malice in every line of his face. "Sleep tight, missy." Victoria allowed Quentin to guide her outside, her mind reeling. After months of uncertainty, of wondering if justice would ever be served, to suddenly be face to face with one of her father's killers, it was overwhelming. "Are you all right?" Quentin asked when they were back on the street. "I don't know." Victoria took a deep, steadying breath. "It was him. He was there that night. And his brother," she broke off, remembering Stover's veiled threat. "The sheriff will find his brother," Quentin assured her. "And in the meantime, you're safe at the hotel." But as they walked back to the Silverado, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that something had irrevocably changed. The relative peace she'd begun to find in Quentin's company now seemed threatened by the resurrection of her worst nightmare. And his imminent departure suddenly felt like more than she could bear. That evening, Victoria couldn't eat. She sat in her small room, jumping at every sound, seeing Lloyd Stover's malevolent eyes every time she closed her own. When a soft knock came at her door just after 9, she nearly cried out in alarm. "Victoria," Quentin's voice, low and concerned. "Are you awake?" She crossed to the door, opening it to find him standing in the hallway, hat in hand. He'd clearly been about to turn in for the night. His shirt was open at the collar, his hair slightly mussed. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right. You seemed shaken earlier. I am. Victoria stepped back, silently inviting him in. It was improper, having a man in her room at this hour, but she found she didn't care. I keep seeing his face, hearing his voice. Quentin entered, leaving the door ajar for propriety's sake. He remained standing, maintaining a respectful distance. It's natural after what you've been through. The shock of recognition, the confirmation that this man was indeed part of what happened to your father, it's bound to bring everything back. It's not just that. Victoria sank onto the edge of her narrow bed. It's what he said about his brother still being out there. What if he comes for me? What if he won't? Quentin said with quiet conviction. The sheriff has men watching the hotel, and Stover would be a fool to come into town now that we know who he is. But you're leaving tomorrow, Victoria said, voicing the fear that had been growing in her all evening. And once you're gone, come with me. The words hung in the small room, stunning in their simplicity and implications. Victoria stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Quentin took a step closer, his expression earnest. Come with me to California. You said yourself you were considering Sacramento. This just moves your timetable up a bit. But I can't just leave. I have responsibilities here to Mrs. Walsh. She'd understand, especially given the circumstances. He knelt before her, bringing their faces level. Victoria, I know this is sudden, and I know we've only known each other a short time, but there's something between us, something real and good. I think we both feel it. Victoria couldn't deny it. In the space of a few days, this man had somehow breached the walls she'd built around her heart, awakening feelings she'd thought forever deadened by grief. I do, she admitted softly, but it's all happening so fast. And with Lloyd Stover's capture and his brother still out there, I'm not thinking clearly. Then don't think. Quentin took her hands in his. For once, just feel. What does your heart tell you? Victoria closed her eyes, trying to quiet the whirlwind of her thoughts and listen to the deeper voice within. What did she want? Safety, yes. Justice for her father, certainly. But beyond those immediate concerns, what did she truly desire for her future? The answer came with surprising clarity. A chance to live again, not just survive. To feel joy and pain and everything in between. To build something new from the ashes of her old life. And Quentin Lawson, with his quiet strength and understanding, had somehow become central to that vision. My heart tells me to be brave, she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. To take a chance, even though it terrifies me. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun after a storm. Then say yes, come with me tomorrow, we'll face whatever comes together. Victoria took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. One step would change everything for better or worse. Yes, she said finally, I'll come with you. The word had barely left her lips when a deafening crash shattered the moment. The front door of the hotel splintered open, followed by shouts and the sound of heavy boots on the stairs. That's her room, down the hall, a rough voice called. Victoria's blood turned to ice. It's him, she gasped. Jeb Stover. Quentin was on his feet instantly, pushing her behind him as he moved toward the door. Stay back, he ordered, his voice taut with tension. But before he could reach the door, it burst inward, revealing a tall man with a wild beard and wilder eyes. The family resemblance to Lloyd Stover was unmistakable, though this man was leaner, with a feverish intensity that his brother had lacked. Found you, Jeb Stover snarled, his gaze fixing on Victoria over Quentin's shoulder. In his hand was a Colt revolver, already cocked and pointed at Quentin's chest. You got my brother locked up, you little— That's far enough, Quentin interrupted, his voice steady despite the gun aimed at him. Sheriff Rhodes knows you're in town. His men are probably already on their way. Stover laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Then I'd best be quick about this. Step aside, cowboy. My quarrel's with the girl." "Not going to happen," Quentin replied. Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful calculation in his stance. He was looking for an opening, a chance to disarm the intruder. "Quentin, don't," she pleaded quietly. "He'll kill you." "Listen to her," Stover mocked. "She knows what's coming. Same thing that happened to her pa when he wouldn't pay up. Only difference is, there won't be nobody left to tell the tale this time." Outside, Victoria could hear shouts and running feet, the sheriff's men, or perhaps other hotel guests alerted by the commotion. But they seemed very far away, and Jeb Stover's finger was tightening on the trigger. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Quentin lunged forward just as Stover fired. The report of the gun was deafening in the small room. Victoria screamed as Quentin staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he barreled into Stover, driving him backward into the hallway. The two men crashed against the opposite wall, grappling for control of the gun. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, watching in horror as they fought. Stover was wild with rage, but Quentin moved with the precision of a man who had faced danger before and knew how to meet it. Another shot rang out, this one going wide and splintering the wooden railing of the staircase. The sound galvanized Victoria into action. She looked around desperately for a weapon and seized upon the heavy brass candlestick on her bedside table. Clutching it tightly, she moved into the hallway just as Stover managed to slam Quentin against the wall, momentarily stunning him. The outlaw raised his gun again, aiming for Quentin's head. "No!" Victoria swung the candlestick with all her strength, connecting with Stover's outstretched arm. The gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Stover howled in pain, the revolver clattering to the floor. Quentin recovered quickly, diving for the weapon while Victoria struck again, this time catching Stover across the back as he bent to reach for the gun. The blow drove him to his knees just as Quentin's fingers closed around the Colt. "Don't move," Quentin ordered, his voice iron as he leveled the gun at Stover's head. The outlaw froze, glaring up at them with hatred burning in his eyes. "You'll pay for this," he spat. "Both of you." "The only one paying is you," Sheriff Rhodes said from the top of the stairs, his own gun drawn. Behind him were two deputies, similarly armed. "Jeb Stover, you're under arrest for attempted murder, breaking and entering, and any other charges I can think of between here and the gallows." As the deputies moved forward to secure Stover, Victoria's attention shifted entirely to Quentin. His face was pale beneath his tan, and she now saw what she'd missed in the chaos, a spreading stain of crimson on his left side, just below his ribs. "You're hurt," she gasped, dropping the candlestick and moving to his side. "It's nothing," he said, though his voice was tight with pain. "Just a graze. Let me see." Victoria carefully lifted his shirt, revealing an angry furrow where Stover's bullet had torn across his flesh. It was bleeding freely but didn't appear to have hit anything vital. "You need a doctor. In a minute." Quentin handed the revolver to one of the deputies, then turned to Victoria, his expression intense. "Are you all right? Am I?" Victoria couldn't believe he was asking about her when he was the one bleeding. "I'm fine. But you took a bullet for me, Quentin Lawson. You could have been killed." "Worth the risk," he said simply, his eyes never leaving hers. Something broke open inside Victoria, then the last barrier around her heart crumbling away as the full realization of what had nearly happened crashed over her. This man had been willing to die to protect her. And she had fought beside him, not frozen in terror as she had the night her father was killed, but acted with courage she hadn't known she possessed. "You're crazy," she told him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Absolutely crazy." "Probably," he agreed, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth despite his pain. But so were you, taking on an armed man with nothing but a candlestick. Victoria laughed through her tears, a sound of relief and disbelief and something very close to joy. We make quite a pair, don't we? The best kind, Quentin said softly, lifting a hand to brush away a tear from her cheek. The kind that faces danger together and comes out stronger on the other side. Sheriff Rhodes cleared his throat, reminding them they weren't alone. Not to interrupt this touching moment, but you really should get that wound looked at, Lawson. And Miss Ellery, I'll need statements from both of you about what happened here. Of course, Sheriff, Victoria said, not taking her eyes off Quentin. But first, we need to see the doctor. And then, Quentin added, his gaze equally intent, we have plans to make. Plans. Rhodes raised an eyebrow. Victoria smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months despite the chaos around them. Yes, Sheriff, we're leaving for California tomorrow. Together, Quentin clarified, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. As Sheriff Rhodes led them downstairs, past the stunned faces of hotel guests and the furious, subdued figure of Jeb Stover being marched to jail, Victoria felt something unfurl within her, a sensation she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The journey to California began 3 days later than planned, owing to Quentin's need for recovery. The doctor had declared his wound messy but manageable, and prescribed several days of rest before attempting the rigors of travel. Victoria had been grateful for the delay, as it gave her time to make proper arrangements with Mrs. Walsh, who was delighted by this turn of events, despite her protestations of how much she would miss Victoria, and to gather what few possessions she wished to bring with her. They traveled by stagecoach, a less comfortable but faster means of catching up with the cattle drive than traveling on horseback would have been. Victoria spent much of the journey watching Quentin, still half expecting to wake and find it had all been a dream, the connection they'd formed, the decision to start a new life together, the terrifying confrontation that had somehow sealed their bond. But it was real. As real as the steady pressure of his hand on hers when the stage hit rough patches, as real as the quiet conversations they shared while other passengers dozed, as real as the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. "What are you thinking?" he asked on the second day, catching her studying his profile as the landscape rolled past. "That I never expected any of this," she admitted. "A week ago I was just existing, one day blending into the next, and now—" "And now," he prompted when she fell silent. Victoria searched for words to describe the transformation she felt. "Now I'm afraid to blink in case it all disappears." Quentin's expression softened. "It won't. I promise you that, Victoria. Whatever lies ahead, we'll face it together." His certainty both comforted and awed her. How could he be so sure when they'd known each other such a short time? And yet, hadn't they already weathered a storm that would have broken many couples who'd been together for years? "I believe you," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I don't know why, but I do." They reached the cattle drive late on the third day, finding it camped along a river that marked the border between Nevada and California. The trail boss, a grizzled veteran named Hank Wilson, looked equal parts relieved and baffled to see Quentin arrive with a woman in tow. "Thought you might have decided to stay in Eureka permanently," Wilson grumbled, though there was no real reproach in his tone. "Didn't expect you to bring company." "Plans change," Quentin said simply, helping Victoria down from the stage. "Miss Ellery and I will be traveling with you to Sacramento, if that's agreeable." Wilson eyed Victoria thoughtfully, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the determined set of her chin. "Don't usually have ladies on cattle drives." "I won't be any trouble," Victoria assured him. "I'm accustomed to hard work and rough conditions." The trail boss grunted, apparently satisfied. "Suppose it's fine then. We're making good time, should reach the ranch in about a week. From there, it's just a day's ride to Sacramento." That night, seated by the campfire, Victoria found herself the object of curious but mostly respectful attention from the cowboys. Jed Harmon was conspicuously absent, having been left behind in Eureka to face charges for his part in the attack on Victoria. As the men gradually drifted off to their bedrolls, Quentin and Victoria remained by the fire, watching the flames dance against the backdrop of a star-filled sky. "Are you sure about this?" Quentin asked softly. "It's not too late to change your mind. We could find you passage on a proper stagecoach to Sacramento instead of this rough journey." Victoria considered the question seriously. The past few days had been exhausting, and the week ahead promised to be even more challenging. But there was something invigorating about facing those challenges, about choosing discomfort and adventure over safety and routine. "I'm sure," she said finally. "I want to be here with you. The journey is part of the new life I'm choosing." Quentin's smile in the firelight made her heart skip. "You're an extraordinary woman, Victoria Ellery." "I'm just a woman who's decided to live again," she replied, reaching for his hand. "Thanks in large part to you. The week that followed was indeed difficult." Victoria rose before dawn each day with the rest of the camp, helped prepare meals, and spent long hours in the saddle as they drove the cattle toward their destination. Her muscles ached, her skin burned from the sun despite the hat Quentin had given her, and by nightfall, she was often too tired to do more than eat a quick supper before falling into an exhausted sleep. Yet despite these hardships, or perhaps because of them, Victoria felt more alive than she had in months. There was a rhythm to life on the trail that suited her, a purposefulness that left little time for dwelling on the past. And always, there was Quentin, his quiet strength and unwavering support a constant in this new, unpredictable existence. The cowboys, initially skeptical of having a woman in their midst, gradually accepted her presence. Several even seemed to enjoy having someone new to talk to, someone who listened with genuine interest to their stories of home and family. "Never seen a lady take to trail life like you have," Wilson remarked one evening as Victoria helped serve the beans and biscuits she'd helped prepare. Most would be complaining from sunup to sundown about the dust and the smell. Victoria smiled, accepting the backhanded compliment for what it was. "When you've lost everything, Mr. Wilson, you learn to appreciate what remains even if it comes with dust and cattle smell." The old trail boss studied her with newfound respect. "Quentin told me something of what happened to you back in Eureka. Terrible business. But if you don't mind my saying, you've got grit, Miss Ellery. That'll serve you well in this country." As they neared their destination, Victoria and Quentin began to discuss more concrete plans for their future. Mrs. Walsh had written ahead to her sister in Sacramento, explaining the circumstances and asking if the offer of work at the boarding house was still available. "And if it isn't," Quentin said as they rode side by side on the final day of the drive, the sprawling ranch that was their destination visible in the distance, "there are other options. The Double Bar owner has been talking about establishing a permanent presence in California. If he does, he's likely to offer me a position overseeing it." "Would you want that?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious about his aspirations. They'd shared so much of their pasts but had only begun to discuss their futures. Quentin considered the question. "I might. I've been on the trail a long time, moving from place to place. The idea of putting down roots again has its appeal." He glanced at her, his expression warm. "Especially now." The implication sent a flutter through Victoria's chest. They had spoken around the edges of what was developing between them, this connection that had formed so quickly yet felt so substantial but had not yet defined it explicitly. "Quentin," she began, suddenly needing clarity. "What exactly are we doing? You and me, I mean." He reined his horse to a stop, prompting her to do the same. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his eyes taking in every detail of her face as if committing it to memory. "What we're doing, Victoria Ellery, is building a life. Together, if you'll have me." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I know it's soon, impossibly soon, by most standards, but I've lived long enough to recognize something rare and precious when I find it, and what I feel for you." He trailed off, seeming to search for words adequate to the task. Victoria felt her heart pounding, hope and fear tangled together in her chest. "What do you feel?" she whispered when he remained silent. "Everything," he said simply. "Hope, joy, a sense of coming home after being lost for years. When I look at you, I see not just who you are now, but who we could be together." Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes. "I'm still broken, Quentin, still healing." "So am I," he said gently. "But maybe that's why we fit. We understand each other's scars because we've survived similar wounds." Victoria considered his words, finding truth in them. What had drawn her to Quentin wasn't just his kindness or his protective nature, but the recognition she'd seen in his eyes, the understanding that came only from having walked through fire and emerged on the other side. Changed, but not destroyed. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. "And that terrifies me. The last people I loved were taken from me so violently. I know." His grip on her hand tightened. "I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life doesn't work that way, as we both know too well. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together, and that every day we have will be lived fully, not just survived." Victoria looked into his eyes and saw the future stretching before them, uncertain, perhaps, but full of possibility. For so long, she had existed in the shadow of what she'd lost. Now, with Quentin, she could step into the light of what might yet be. "I think," she said slowly, a smile beginning to form, "that sounds like the kind of promise worth building a life around." Quentin's answering smile was radiant. "Is that a yes, Victoria Ellery, to us, to seeing where this journey takes us?" "Yes," she said, the word carrying the weight of new beginnings. "That's a yes." They arrived at the Diamond S Ranch that evening, the cattle drive successfully completed after weeks on the trail. The owner, a shrewd businessman named Samuel Stevens, was pleased with the condition of the herd and particularly interested in the stories Quentin shared about potential expansion opportunities in the region. "Might be I could use a man with your experience on a more permanent basis out here," Stevens remarked as they sat on the ranch house porch after dinner. "California's growing fast. Good cattle land is still available for those who know where to look." Quentin glanced at Victoria, sitting quietly beside him. "That's an intriguing proposition, Mr. Stevens. I'd certainly be interested in discussing it further." "Good, good." Stevens nodded, clearly pleased. "Take a few days to rest up, then we'll talk specifics. You and your lady are welcome to stay in the guest cabin as long as needed." When Stevens had retired for the night, leaving them alone on the porch, Victoria turned to Quentin. "Did you mean that, about staying in California?" "I did." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "If the right opportunity presents itself, and if it's what you want as well." "What about Texas? Your life there?" Quentin's expression turned thoughtful. "Texas will always be part of who I am, but there's nothing tying me there now, no family waiting for my return. Just memories, some good, some painful." He looked out at the rolling hills surrounding the ranch, bathed in moonlight. "Maybe it's time for new memories. A fresh start, like you said." Victoria leaned against his shoulder, her heart full. I'd like that, making new memories together. The following morning, a letter awaited Victoria at the ranch. Mrs. Walsh's sister, responding to the inquiry about work at her Sacramento boarding house. The news was positive. Not only was the position still available, but Mrs. Eleanor Hammond was delighted at the prospect of Victoria's arrival and urged her to come as soon as convenient. It's all falling into place, Victoria marveled as she and Quentin walked through the ranch's apple orchard later that day. Almost too neatly, as if. As if what? Quentin prompted when she hesitated. Victoria shook her head, not wanting to voice her irrational fear. As if it's too good to be true. As if something must go wrong because happiness, this complete, can't possibly last. Quentin stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Victoria, he said gently, that's the grief talking. When you've lost as much as we have, it's natural to protect yourself by expecting the worst. But that's no way to live. I know, she sighed, frustrated with her own doubts. Logically, I know that, but emotionally. It takes time, he assured her. The fear doesn't disappear overnight. But each good day builds on the one before it, until eventually you realize you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. You're just living. Victoria studied his face, finding comfort in its familiar lines. Is that how it was for you, after you lost your wife and son, eventually? His expression softened with remembered pain. It wasn't a straight path. There were good days and bad days, times when I thought I was healing and times when grief would hit me so hard I could barely breathe. But slowly, the good days started to outnumber the bad. Victoria nodded, understanding perfectly. And now, he said, taking her hands in his, I can remember them with love instead of just pain. I can honor their memory by living a life they would be proud of. And I can open my heart to new love without feeling like I'm betraying what we had. The simple honesty of his words moved Victoria deeply. This was what had drawn her to Quentin from the beginning, his ability to acknowledge pain without being defined by it, to carry grief and hope side by side. You make me brave, she told him, rising on tiptoe to press a soft kiss to his lips. Brave enough to believe in happiness again. 2 days later, they departed for Sacramento, traveling by wagon along roads considerably smoother than the open trail had been. The city, when they reached it, was a shock to Victoria's senses after weeks in the wilderness. The noise, the crowds, the sheer energy of a place growing rapidly in the aftermath of the gold rush. Mrs. Hammond's boarding house was located in a respectable neighborhood not far from the Capitol building. It was a handsome 3-story structure with a wide porch and neatly kept garden, catering primarily to government employees and traveling businessmen. Eleanor Hammond herself proved to be cut from the same practical, no-nonsense cloth as her sister. She welcomed Victoria warmly, showed her to a small but comfortable room on the 3rd floor, and outlined the duties the position would entail, helping with meals, cleaning, laundry, and generally ensuring the comfort of guests. And your young man? She asked, glancing at Quentin, who had carried Victoria's trunk upstairs and now stood awkwardly in the doorway. Mr. Lawson is considering a position with the Diamond S Ranch, Victoria explained, suddenly uncertain how to define their relationship. I see. Mrs. Hammond's shrewd eyes moved between them, taking in what remained unspoken. Well, Mr. Lawson, you're welcome to take meals here whenever you're in the city. Any friend of Victoria's is a friend of mine. Thank you, madam, Quentin replied with genuine gratitude. I appreciate the hospitality. When Mrs. Hammond had gone, leaving them alone in Victoria's new room, a momentary awkwardness fell between them. They had spent nearly every day together since leaving Eureka, but now their paths were diverging, if only temporarily. I should head back to the ranch, Quentin said finally. Stevens wants to discuss terms for the position he's offering. Victoria nodded, trying to ignore the pang in her chest at the thought of his departure. When will I see you again? Soon, he promised, stepping closer to take her hands. A few days at most. I need to get things settled with Stevens and then. He paused, something like nervousness flickering across his face. And then, Victoria prompted, and then I'd like to call on you properly, if that's agreeable. Victoria couldn't help but smile at his formal tone. That would be very agreeable, Mr. Lawson, he grinned, relaxing. Good, because I have plans for us, Victoria Ellery, big plans. Is that so? She teased, heart lightening. Care to share these plans all in good time? He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. For now, just know that I'll be counting the hours until I see you again. After he left, Victoria sat on the edge of her narrow bed, looking around at what would be her home for the foreseeable future. It was a far cry from the homestead where she'd grown up, from the hotel room in Eureka, where she'd survived the darkest months of her life, even from the open skies of the cattle drive. Yet somehow, it felt right. A transitional space, perhaps a place to catch her breath and find her footing in this new life she'd chosen. A place to heal, to grow, to discover who Victoria Ellery might become now that she was allowing herself to live again. For the first time in months, the future didn't loom before her like an empty void, but rather beckoned with promise and possibility. And at the center of that future, increasingly central to her vision of what might be, was Quentin Lawson, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and still looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. Victoria unpacked her few belongings, arranged them neatly in the room's small dresser, and went downstairs to begin her new duties, a sense of purpose in her step that had been missing for too long. True to his word, Quentin returned to Sacramento 3 days later. His negotiations with Stevens had been successful. He would be overseeing the establishment of a new Diamond S operation in California, with responsibilities that would keep him primarily in the Sacramento area, but require occasional travel back to the main ranch. It's a good opportunity, he told Victoria as they walked along the American River on a mild autumn afternoon. Better pay than I had as a foreman, more responsibility, and the chance to build something from the ground up. You sound excited, Victoria observed, pleased by the enthusiasm in his voice. I am. He glanced at her, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. But what matters most is whether you're happy here. Do you like working for Mrs. Hammond? Victoria considered the question. Her first days at the boarding house had been busy ones, learning the rhythms of the household and the preferences of the regular boarders. The work wasn't so different from what she'd done at the Silverado Hotel, but the atmosphere was more refined, the pace less frantic. I do, she said honestly. She's fair and straightforward like her sister. The boarders are mostly gentlemen with government business, so they're well behaved, and Sacramento is. She gestured at the bustling city around them. It's alive in a way Eureka never was. So many people, so much happening. No regrets, then. About leaving Nevada, Victoria shook her head firmly. None. Everything that mattered to me there is gone. Here I can start fresh, build a new life. She squeezed his hand. With you, I hope. Quentin's smile was warm enough to chase away the autumn chill. That's what I'm counting on. He led her to a bench overlooking the river. Which brings me to those plans I mentioned. Ah, the mysterious plans. Victoria sat, arranging her skirts. I've been curious. Quentin remained standing, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Victoria, I know this is fast. Probably too fast by conventional standards. And if you feel that way, I understand completely and am willing to wait as long as needed." Victoria's heart began to race as she realized what might be coming. "But," she prompted softly, "but life is short and unpredictable. We both know that better than most." He set his hat aside and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "When you find something precious, something that makes you feel whole again after being broken, it seems foolish to waste time on convention or worry about what others might think." Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes as Quentin reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a modest diamond that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Victoria Ellery," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You came into my life when I least expected it but most needed it. You've shown me courage and resilience that humble me. You've reminded me what it means to truly live, not just exist. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of that love." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Victoria looked down at the earnest face of this man who had, in the span of mere weeks, become the center of her world. A man who understood her pain because he had lived through his own. A man who had seen her at her lowest and still found something in her worth cherishing. Was it too soon? By society's standards, undoubtedly. They'd known each other barely a month, and yet in that month they had faced death together, had shared their deepest wounds and most cherished hopes, had seen each other's true character revealed in moments of crisis. Some people, Victoria reflected, could know each other for years and never achieve the depth of understanding that she and Quentin had forged in these intense, life-changing weeks. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain despite the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Yes, I will marry you, Quentin Lawson." Joy broke across his face like sunrise. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, then rose to sit beside her, gathering her into his arms as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I promise you," he whispered against her hair, "that I will spend every day trying to give you the happiness you deserve. I can't replace what you've lost, wouldn't try to. But I swear I'll give you reasons to look forward, not back. Reasons to hope, to fight for the future we can build together." Victoria leaned back to look into his face, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "You already have," she told him, pressing her palm to his cheek. "From the moment you stepped between me and danger in that alley in Eureka, you've been giving me reasons to believe in goodness again. In possibility. In love." Their kiss, tender at first and then deepening with promise, sealed the vows they'd made, not just the formal engagement they'd agreed to, but the deeper commitment to face life together, to honor their past losses while building a future filled with joy. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at Sacramento's First Presbyterian Church. Mrs. Hammond insisted on hosting a modest reception at the boarding house, where the regular boarders toasted the couple with genuine affection, having quickly come to respect Victoria's quiet competence and Quentin's straightforward manner. "To new beginnings," Mrs. Hammond declared, raising her glass. "May your life together be blessed with joy to outweigh the sorrows you've both endured." The sentiment brought tears to Victoria's eyes. Joy to outweigh sorrow, wasn't that the most anyone could hope for? Not the absence of pain, which was impossible in this life, but enough happiness to balance the scales, to make the journey worthwhile despite its hardships. Looking at Quentin, handsome in his new suit, his eyes never leaving her face, Victoria felt something she had thought forever lost to her: contentment. Not the delirious happiness of romantic novels, but something deeper and more sustaining, a bone-deep certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. Their first months of marriage were spent in a small house on the outskirts of Sacramento, close enough to town for Victoria to continue working at the boarding house, while Quentin established the Diamond Estiques, California operation. The work was demanding for both of them, but they carved out time each evening to share the day's events, to plan for the future, to simply enjoy each other's company. Victoria discovered in Quentin not just a protector or provider, but a true partner who valued her opinions and sought her counsel in matters both personal and professional. He, in turn, found in her a strength that complemented his own, a resilience that had been forged in the fire of loss and emerged stronger for the tempering. In the spring of 1877, 6 months after their wedding, Victoria received news that Lloyd Stover had been tried, convicted, and hanged for his crimes. His brother Jeb had received a similar sentence. The news didn't bring the closure Victoria had expected. Instead, it merely confirmed what she already knew, that justice, while necessary, couldn't restore what had been taken from her. Only love could do that, and love was something she now had in abundance. By summer, Quentin's work with the Diamond S had expanded to include the purchase of a small ranch property 20 miles outside Sacramento land that would serve as a way station for cattle being moved to market, but could also, he told Victoria with barely contained excitement, become a home of their own. "It's not much to look at now," he admitted as they stood on a hillside overlooking the property. The existing structures were modest: a small cabin that had seen better days, a barn in need of repairs, some rudimentary corrals. But with work, it could be something special. Victoria turned slowly, taking in the sweep of land that stretched before them, golden hills dotted with oak trees, a creek winding through the valley below, mountains blue in the distance. It was beautiful in a way entirely different from the Nevada desert she'd grown up in, lush and full of life. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. "A place to build our future." They moved to the ranch that fall, dividing their time between renovating the cabin and establishing the Diamond S operations. Victoria planted a garden, started a small flock of chickens, and applied the skills she'd learned growing up on a homestead to creating a comfortable home amid the ongoing construction. The work was hard but satisfying. Each improvement, each new addition, represented a step further away from the grief that had once threatened to consume her, and closer to the life she and Quentin were building together. In January of 1878, as winter rains turned the hills a vibrant green, Victoria discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror: joy at the new life growing within her, terror at the thought of loving someone so vulnerable in a world that had already taken so much from her. "I'm afraid," she confessed to Quentin one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. "Afraid to hope too much, to love too deeply." "What if?" "No what ifs," he interrupted gently. "We can't live that way, Victoria. Yes, there are risks in loving, in hoping, but the alternative is to wall ourselves off from the very things that make life worth living." Victoria sighed, curling closer against him. "I know you're right, but knowing and feeling are different things." "Then feel this," Quentin said, his voice low in the darkness. "Feel how much I love you, how much I already love this child. Feel the life we're making together right here, right now, and trust that whatever comes, we're strong enough to face it." Victoria closed her eyes, focusing on the solid warmth of her husband beside her, the tiny flutter of movement beneath his hand, the home they had built around them. This was real. This was now, and it was beautiful despite, or perhaps because of, its fragility. "I do trust that," she whispered. "I trust you. I trust us." Their son, James Timothy Lawson, was born on a clear September morning in 1878, healthy and strong with a shock of dark hair like his father's and eyes that would eventually settle into the same changeable gray-green. They named him for the grandfather and uncle he would never know, a bridge between past and future that felt right to both of them. Holding her son for the first time, Victoria felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. But alongside that love was not fear, as she had expected, but a profound gratitude for this new life, for the man who had helped her create it, for the second chance they had both been given. "He's perfect," Quentin whispered, his voice choked with emotion as he gazed down at their child. "Absolutely perfect." "Yes," Victoria agreed, meeting her husband's tear-filled eyes with her own. "He is, and so is this our family, our home, our life together." Quentin leaned down to kiss her, his touch conveying all the love words couldn't express. "From the ashes," he murmured against her lips. Victoria smiled, understanding perfectly. From the ashes of their respective tragedies, they had built something beautiful, a love that honored the past while embracing the future, a family forged not despite their losses but partly because of them. As little James began to grow and thrive, the ranch flourished as well. Quentin's work with the Diamond S expanded, eventually allowing them to purchase the property outright. They added to the original cabin until it became a proper house, built a new barn and bunkhouse for the occasional hands they hired during busy seasons, and established a small but respected herd of their own alongside the Diamond S cattle they managed. In the spring of 1880, their family grew again with the arrival of a daughter, Emily Rose, named for Quentin's first wife but quickly developing a personality entirely her own, stubborn, bright, and fearless from her earliest days. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, work and rest, challenges met and overcome together. There were difficult times, of course, drought years that tested their resources, illness that swept through the household one winter, the normal strains of building a life and raising children in a still wild land. But through it all, Victoria never forgot how close she had come to missing this life entirely, how near her spirit had been to breaking beyond repair in those dark days after her family's murder. And she never ceased to be grateful for the tall, quiet cowboy who had seen something in her worth fighting for, even when she couldn't see it herself. On their 5th wedding anniversary, after the children were asleep, and the house quiet under a blanket of autumn stars, Victoria and Quentin sat on the porch of the home they had built, a quilt wrapped around their shoulders against the evening chill. "Happy?" Quentin asked, his arm warm around her waist. Victoria considered the question, not with the hesitation of earlier years but with the thoughtfulness of a woman who had learned the true value of happiness. She thought of their children sleeping peacefully inside, of the land that sustained them stretching out into the darkness, of the man beside her who had kept every promise he'd made that day by the river in Sacramento. "Deeply," she answered, resting her head against his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible again." Quentin pressed a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes I wonder if your father and brother can see you now, see the life you've built, the mother you've become. I think they'd be proud." Victoria smiled, touched by his understanding of what their approval would mean to her. "I hope so. And I hope Emily and your son can see you too, see that you found room in your heart to love again without diminishing what you felt for them." "I believe they can," Quentin said softly. "I have to believe that they're at peace, and that they understand." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind in the oak trees, the occasional hoot of an owl hunting in the valley below. "Thank you," Victoria said finally, the words inadequate for all she meant to express. For what? Quentin asked, though she suspected he knew. For finding me when I was lost, for giving me reasons to fight when I wanted to surrender, for showing me that hope isn't foolish even after everything. She turned in his arms to face him, tracing the beloved lines of his face with gentle fingers. For loving me back to life. Quentin caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. We saved each other, Victoria. That's the truth of it. We were both half alive, going through the motions until fate or providence or whatever you want to call it brought us together. Victoria nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. Their love story hadn't been one of innocent first love or carefree courtship. It had been forged in the crucible of shared pain, tempered by mutual understanding, strengthened by the conscious choice to risk heartbreak again rather than live safely but emptily. To us, then, she said, lifting her face for his kiss, and to all the days ahead. To us, Quentin agreed, gathering her close, and to the beautiful life we've only just begun to build. As they went inside, hand in hand, to the home and family they had created together, Victoria felt a sense of completion that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. Her spirit, once so nearly broken by tragedy, now soared with the quiet joy of a life well lived and deeply loved. And in that moment, she knew with bone-deep certainty that while the scars of the past would always remain, they had been transformed from wounds into wisdom, from breaking points into the very foundation upon which she and Quentin had built their shared happiness, a happiness made all the more precious for having been found after such profound loss.